Hey, I'm Tommy Ellison, and this is Senior Moments. I can't tell you what I had for breakfast this morning, but I remember every detail of that time I came this close to being suspended my senior year in high school, just 3 weeks before graduation. So stick around. This is proof that some things from a misspent youth just don't fade away. Let's go. Well, hey guys, it's time for Senior Moments. Evidence of a evidence of a misspent youth. And yes, we are live. I can't cut that last little bit out. We can't do that, can we? No, we can't do that. So I welcome you to the show, if that's what you want to call this. You know, evidence of a misspent youth and Senior Moments is basically just me reminiscing about things that happened in my past, things that happened 40, 50, 60 years ago, and contrast that against the fact that I have a hard time remembering where my keys are and other short-term memory issues. So, and today's episode, believe it or not, is number 25. I can't believe I've done this many episodes to date. And, but you know, I'm having a ball. I hope y'all are too, enjoying watching it. And today's episode, I have entitled, Leave the Driving to Us. Now, some of you may remember that little slogan. It was actually part of a Greyhound ad, and I found that. I'm going to play it for you right quick here and I may get a copyright strike when I play this, but we'll see. But here's what the ad sounded like. It was on television, on radio. It sounded something like this.
Go Greyhound and leave the driving to us.
You remember it?
Go Greyhound
and leave the driving to us.
Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. As a matter of fact, but I can give you the names of 30 or 40 guys that will sign an affidavit swearing to it. And I guess in the spirit of full disclosure, I'm not suggesting that anyone actually try this little thing that happened, and I'll tell you about it in just a second. But, you know, I'm just giving testimony, I guess, to something that happened one fall night in 1971 while I was playing football for Samford University here in Birmingham. But this was not a home game. This was actually an away game. We were playing Delta State University, and Delta State is in Cleveland, Mississippi. And I guess to make matters worse in this context, it was an evening game. So, you know, we played pretty tough game that night. If I remember, it was a very physical matchup, and everybody, you know, got on that bus, you know, beat up and sore. And, you know, we had always rode Greyhound buses to these away games. We weren't like these teams that flew to their opposing team's venues. Closest we ever came to that was for the Division II National Championship, and it was supposed to be in Chicago. I think I've told you stories about this. And they moved it at the last minute to Phoenix City, Alabama. So we rode a bus to Phoenix City. But you remember Greyhound, I know. And the crazy thing about this Greyhound bus story was that our driver was always the same guy. And I guess he had been driving for Samford. I don't know if it was somebody that we requested that he be the driver. And really nobody, well, to my knowledge, actually knew his real name. He just went by EB. EB, that was our driver for the bus to all of the away games that I was involved with. And from my understanding, talking to older players, he was around driving the bus even when they were going to their away games. And so that particular night, there were about 40 players on the bus, you know, plus one or two coaches. And the rest of the coaches and the coaching staff were following behind in cars that were provided by Dodge through their student driver program, and I'll go into a little bit detail on that a little later. But after the showers and the post game routines you go through, we loaded up for what was amounting to be a long 4-hour drive home. And remember, there were no interstates; it was just Mississippi and Alabama 2-lane, and sometimes a brief stint on a 4-lane road. Coming home from Cleveland, Mississippi. And, well, here's what happened. And you'll pardon me while I get a sip of water. And sometimes you may not pardon me, but nevertheless, this is what happened. We were on this long, dark stretch of highway, and suddenly, EB decided he needed to use the restroom. Now, our head coach, Wayne Grubb, told him that, and Coach Grubb always kind of sat up near the front, actually the first seat. If you got on the bus, he would be in that first seat to the left there. And he would communicate with the driver and talk to the other coach that sat up there with him. And Coach Grubb told EB, he said, I don't want to stop, because if we do that, everybody's going to want to get off the bus. They want to go to the restroom. They're going to buy snacks, and we're going to delay this whole trip home by another half hour just by getting off and, doing our business and getting back on at some little convenience store. So Coach Grubb came up with this wild idea that he and EB would switch places while the bus was still rolling. And I might say doing about 70 miles an hour down the highway, trying to get home. And of course, we left Cleveland at probably, 9:30, 10 o'clock following that game. So we had, an ETA of being back at Sanford probably around 2 a.m. And so, and I can understand Grubb's logic, because if we stopped at some little convenience store that had one toilet in the men's room and maybe one urinal, it would take forever for everybody that wanted to relieve themselves to do it. So anyway, he said, let's just swap places. And well, I was kind of sitting up near the front, and I was probably one of the few that weren't actually asleep or, not really paying attention to what was going up near the driver's portion of the bus. But it did give me the opportunity, by sitting up front, to kind of watch this whole thing unfold in front of me. And what happened was EB would hold the wheel steady while Coach Grubb positioned himself, standing there next to him in the aisle, and able to grab the steering wheel. And then EB would slide out from the driver's seat into the aisle, and Coach Grubb would, still holding the wheel, slide under the wheel and take control of the bus. And of course, the bus only slowed down in that few seconds that he took his foot off the accelerator, long enough to get out from behind the seat and for Coach Grubb to get in and again depress the accelerator to get back up to whatever that speed was. And it was night, it was dark, and somehow they pulled it off without crashing the bus. I mean, it's a wonder we didn't all end up in a ditch somewhere in Mississippi. And of course, EB headed down the aisle towards the back of the bus where the restroom was located. And if any of you have ridden on a Greyhound bus, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's always one of the last things on the bus before you get to the big bench seat in the back. And so he headed back to the back of the bus to do number one. And here's what happened. Coach Grubb gave him a few moments, just enough time to unzip and start doing what men do, standing there on the restroom of the bus, and that's when Coach Grubb slammed on the brakes, causing the bus to, lurch forward. And of course, the players that were half asleep were, kind of thrown up against the headrest in front of them. And everybody, woke up trying to figure out what in the world was going on. We all thought well, I didn't because I was watching this, but a lot of players thought, what in the world? Somebody's pulled out in front of us. Whatever the case may be, that bus had to come to a sudden, not stop, but just a real definite, hitch in the giddy up there. And, at that same time, of course, there was this loud scream from the back of the bus. We heard EB yelling, "AARGH!" Followed by some real choice words that weren't necessarily compliant with the Samford motto of academic excellence in a Christian environment. And everybody woke up. We were, confused, kind of laughing, trying to figure out what had happened. And of course, some of them that saw EB go to the back of the bus knew what happened, including yours truly. And then as EB finished his business there, he finally came back up to the front of the bus. And of course, his pants were soaking wet with, and he was, I guess at that point in time, kind of half laughing that Grubb had pranked him this way, but he was, I would say, half laughing and maybe half cussing Coach Grubb, all the way back to the driver's seat of the bus. And there, again, without slowing down, but just a bit, they reversed the switch that they had pulled, and EB could drive again. And, I guess driving home wearing his cold, wet pants for the rest of the bus ride home. And Grubb thought that was so funny, and we thought it was funny. EB didn't think it was funny. But, looking back, it was like a prank between two overgrown teenagers, the kind of thing that makes you laugh, decades later, but wasn't, if you thought about it, all that, well, it was funny, but it wasn't, it was, it could have gone bad quickly, I guess, if something had happened, and coaches, they grow older, but the mischievous spirit, I guess, from the locker room in an athletic environment never quite leaves them. Later that season, we found out something that we thought kind of funny about those Dodge student driver cars that the coaches were driving around. And when I say driving around, they were, checking curfew at night, driving back and forth from their homes. And of course, the two cars that they had were always following the buses. They sometimes actually carried a player or two where they were maybe a quarterback or a running back or somebody that they needed to continue to talk to about the game plan. And then if we ever had one, one of our players that was injured to the point where he wasn't seriously injured, but just needed a place where they could stretch out a little better, they would put those guys in the back seat to make them a little bit more comfortable on a long drive home. And we made a lot of those long trips. I remember, we played schools like Jacksonville State and North Alabama, which are, relatively short trips. But then we went to Newberry, South Carolina. And I remember probably the longest trip was maybe out in Arkansas. I can't remember the name of the school, but it was out somewhere near Arlington, Arkansas. It seemed like 10 or 12 hours away. Oh, probably the longest may have been Boone, North Carolina, which was a long ways away. So there was some long bus rides. But anyway, these coaches were driving these student driver cars. Had like driver's education printed on the side of the doors. And about I don't know, 2 months later, it was actually in January, my roommate, who was Buddy Anderson, who famous coach here in Alabama, Hall of Fame, he was my roommate for the first 2 years I was there. He and I got a letter in our little mailbox there on campus. And, the letter was encouraging us to consider buying a Dodge when we were, obviously old enough and of age where we were investing in our own car for ourselves and our families. And apparently someone in the athletic department or at the dealership maybe had convinced Chrysler that Samford University had a driver's ed program. I'm thinking about this. I'm not even sure if I should be telling this story, but nevertheless, that's what was happening. And because, no such program existed. It wasn't a class. It wasn't a physical education class. It wasn't it was non-existent. No such program existed on campus. And I guess in reality, it was just a creative way to get 2 cars for the coaching staff to use without having to use their own personal vehicles. And I still laugh sometimes wondering, who the culprit was in that deal. Was it the dealer who made it up and made it happen, or was it the coaches who, played along? And either way, it was, I guess, another wild story that we look back and remember about that 1971 season. I remember an old adage that went something like this: the difference between men and boys is the price of their toys. And I guess the real moral of this story was some boys never really grow up and are always up to some kind of foolishness, and even in their old age. And maybe the moral of this story that I'm telling you is sometimes the craziest moments make the best memories, as long as you live to tell about them. And fortunately for us that night, we lived to tell about it. Well, listen, thanks for watching, and be sure to come back next week at 5 for Senior Moments, Evidence of a Misspent Youth. And be sure and listen to this, the wise words of this handsome guy coming up. He's smart, he's humble, and he's a personal friend of mine. And I hope you'll pay attention and do what he tells you to do. It'll be helpful to my channel here on YouTube and Facebook. Thanks again for coming and showing up on a Sunday night, live at 5, Senior Moments, Evidence of a Misspent Youth. I'll see you for episode number 26 next Sunday. Have a great evening and have a great week. Good night. Well, hey, thanks for spending a few minutes with me on Senior Moments. If you enjoyed the ride, be sure and tap that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. I'll be back soon with more stories from a misspent youth, and maybe some of yours too.